perception is reality.
Maybe you have to sacrifice and like put some time, but it doesn't have to suffer.
People are so bogged down with just even basics and so much information that getting to the play is hard.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining me. So today I sit down with my guest, Monica Boldt from BoldFitTechnique. Monica is a Strong First Elite instructor, and I contacted her because the work that she does and puts out on Indian clubs and stick mobility is so fascinating. And the combination of mobility training and strength training that she does is just absolutely phenomenal. So I was excited to talk with Monica about her experience in strength training, as well as the work that she does of incorporating Indian clubs and incredible modality, as well as stick mobility into not only her personal training, but as well as what she does with her clients. So it was a blast to talk to Monica. I know you get a lot of value out of this, especially with adding mobility into your strength training. All right, we'll get on with the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you on the inside.
And we're back. Monica, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So it seems like we possibly might have crossed paths about like a decade or so ago, possibly through RKC. Not sure, but it was St. Paul, Dayton's Bluff Community Center, kind of started this journey a long time ago. So if so, it's great to see you again. If not, it's nice to meet you for the first time.
Likewise.
Yeah. So as I said before, I love following the work that you do. I know you've been in the Strong First world, in the strength piece, but the work that you've done with Indian clubs and stick mobility, as well as combining those two modalities together, I think is so important. And I know from firsthand and personal experience, mobility is something that I know is so important. Always kind of sometimes forget to keep it in the system and work with. And every time I see your work, I'm like, I need to get back into Indian club work. So I figured bring you on. So first it's going to inspire me because it's all about me, but no, I'm sure it will inspire listeners as well. So again, this is going to be great. And I really appreciate it. So to kick this off, Monica, if you could just give us a little bit of the origin story. How did you get into this world of strength and eventually becoming into coaching, and kind of what led you into all the work that you do now?
Okay. So I think for a lot of us, there's probably a really personal component to why we do what we do. So there's definitely a personal component how I got into all this, because I was a kind of a sickly child. I grew up actually figure skating. I started when I was 4, and everything was a challenge for me. I was taller than everybody else, and I didn't feel particularly athletic, but there was always something in my mind that was my ultimate goal. I wanted to feel like I could use my body to its full potential, and I could go out and do things, sports or whatever, anything athletic, and feel that I'm not just, going crawling. Mm-hmm. So it started there with more of the mental aspect, because I kept, when you're skating and stuff, you're falling all the time. And so you learn how to fall and get back up, fall and get back up. And through those 14 years, that just kind of set the framework in my mind of creating a tenacity and never giving up for those goals and those dreams, and where I ultimately wanted to be. So my vision started actually when I was really, really young, and I didn't really know it. So probably when I was about 15 or 16, I knew that I wanted to be a trainer. I wanted to enter the fitness world. I think a lot of it was self-motivated, because I was like, I'm a weakling here. And when I started training, I hired a trainer when I was about 15. And I just fell in love with it. I thought, wow, look at the possibilities here. So wow. I went through certifications. I was actually hassling between getting a degree in music, because I'm also a classical singer, music or kinesiology. And ultimately, I went with music. I got my degrees in music, but I knew I wanted to pursue fitness as well. So got myself certified. And then, as I was talking about earlier, but I just kind of did the traditional strength route. I did a lot of trial and error, and a lot of my approaches are really one-on-one based with the human, because, through my certifications and training and education, it's just a starting place. But once you're dealing with another human being day in and day out, and their lifestyle, their mental state, their body, what's going on, you realize you can't be so dogmatic and so, black and white about it. You have to work with someone. So that shaped a lot. into my approach of things. But when I got introduced into kettlebells, it was, like I said, early, 2009, 2010 through the RKC. And that just opened up a whole world. I liked the style of it. I liked that you didn't have to, it wasn't super complicated. But that also, it was a skill, and you had to challenge yourself. So went through that certification, and then ultimately down the road, I got acquainted with Strong First after they had their split, and decided to, take advantage of all of their courses and learn as much as I possibly could through that process. So became Strong First Elite last year. That was an ultimate goal that I wanted.
Congrats.
And thanks. And along the way, Indian clubs came into my life, and then stick mobility. And I think, because I would say a lot of the modalities I have kind of surrounded myself with is because of my creative background in music and skating. So there's tons of modalities, but those are the ones I primarily train with, just because they're super personal to me, and, they're effective, but it just has that those three kind of have a great synergy for what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
With clients.
There's like an art of play to it, right?
Absolutely. That's how I feel. I feel like a lot of those things, you learn the history of it, you learn the kind of foundational aspects, and then there's opportunities to explore.
Right. It's interesting you came from a figure skating background, because I've seen that from, I worked with a lot of youth hockey players for a while and worked with some skaters. And it's one of those sports that it's kind of like skateboarding, right? You try a trick over and over again, and they're going to fail a lot.
Yes.
Till eventually it sticks and it hits. And you look at that of a kind of just a child growing up perspective, and like just the message that you're getting is like, yeah, you can fail over and over again. And then once you stick it, it's that emphasis of pride and like, oh my, like you got it. Like that's such a life lesson, I think. So if there's other sports, I'm sure that can do it, but it just seemed like figure skating is one of those that you kind of have to deep dive into it. There's probably not a lot of great natural skaters right off the bat. Like it's a skill you have to develop from early on.
Absolutely. And I wasn't one of the naturals. So I'm watching these girls that are much shorter than me. I'm like, oh my gosh, but I didn't want to quit. And interesting enough, I got back into figure skating as an adult pre-COVID. So I got myself some new skates, and I've skated throughout the years, but I wanted to make a concerted effort to actually start like making goals in what I was doing. And all the training that I've been doing in the meantime with my clubs, my kettlebells, just getting strong. I mean, everything is so much easier when I'm back out on the skates. I was like, wow, this is a direct carryover into this. So
in what ways? Was it the balance of it, just the strength, the endurance, just a combination?
The strength, the coordination, like particularly jumps. I wasn't a great jumper when I was younger, but I have noticed, so like when I started pre-COVID, so I started figure skating again pre-COVID, and things were fine. I still felt a little kind of not in my body. Well, then the ice rink shut down. So I had all that time to really, I've been working on like hitting certain PRs and just really trying to get my strength gains up considerably for the last couple of years. And so when I went back to skating, everything became immensely easier. Immensely. Like even the Indian clubs, because I started that, it's kind of that whole brain thing going on with the clubs. So once I got back to skating, it's like, wow, I don't have any fear. Like my coordination, balance, strength, I'm landing on one leg, all that stuff just was so much easier.
Yeah. It's one of those sports that feels like flow can come a lot more naturally to it. It's like, I remember, like I worked for a place where we worked with a lot of youth hockey players, and I had never skated before in my life till the guy I worked for a bit gave me a pair of skates and said, if you're going to train hockey players, you better freaking know how to skate. It's like, cause if they ever see you and put you out, like you gotta show the part a little bit. So I learned how to skate. And once I learned how to skate and actually just get on your edges and move like that, there's something about that glide on the ice that the only thing I could relate it to is I wakeboarded for a while. And it's like that same feeling of being on the water and just kind of gliding through where like, other sports like running and stuff like that, I think you can get that same thing, but there is something to that glide that just puts you in a different mindset. Did you feel that?
It absolutely, it's more of anything that's highly skill based like that, or it combines so many different components, because you're thinking about artistry, you're thinking about, power and your strokes and everything else about your body, like that mental aspect of complete focus into what you're doing, I think is priceless, because anything that stimulates that. See, I don't really get that from running. I just think of, oh my gosh, I'm bored. It doesn't really get me in that state at all, because I think it's not skill based enough. You know what I mean? I get bored with it. Like I tried hot yoga back in the day. And it was just, what's the one that you do like 26 positions? I can't remember, but anyhow, I was just too bored with it.
Okay.
So, because skating has all that component to it, you definitely kind of just get into that flow, total focus, and you come away from a session feeling just, wow, oh, I feel good. You feel kind of put together.
Right. Did you feel that kind of that artistic feeling when you got into kettlebells? Because I know you, like you said, you were kind of in the first like traditional strength training, which I think a lot of coaches, I was there myself, you kind of just go through the motions of NASM or ACSM and just kind of hit the different machines and kind of body parts and stuff. But kettlebells had this, there was almost an art to it right off the bat from there. Did you feel the same thing?
I did. It stimulated the athleticism that I felt I was lacking, where you're kind of, again, like the traditional bodybuilding style, you're thinking about individual body parts. But with kettlebells, you are thinking about your whole body. And so it did, for what it's worth, like I personally like to look like I'm moving well. I want to make it look good. That's just a personal thing with me. I'm kind of a perfectionist. So I enjoy that component, because it's, for me, because of my music background, we're always considering adding layer upon layer upon layer of, finesse to it. And so I just have that in my brain. And so when I translate myself over to fitness, I still have that component. I'm doing a get up or a bent press, and I'm thinking, how can I make this more efficient? How can I perform this better, but also make it look aesthetically like a dance or a just something artistic looking? You don't have to, but I personally like to.
Okay. Do you have a process you go through in your mind of doing that? Like, because obviously, like we want to get better in certain things, but are you? I'm curious about it with music, because you said like adding that finesse to it. Like when you say that, what do you mean by that? Is it the different pitch that you have? Is it more of the effortless pursuit of getting what you're looking for?
So for fitness, it would be like a get up would be a good example. So I think I'm very visual. So I kind of see it in my head what I'm looking for. And I'm thinking about angles, again, of course, the angles that are aligned. Where's my foot placed? Like, is it caving in? That's not necessarily pretty in my mind. And so I think about, again, am I having an elevated posture? Where's my head looking? Things like that. Again, not necessarily needful for strength purposes, but it's just me. I like to add layers of, I see things very much in shapes. So when I'm doing a move for my body type, because everyone's different, and I'll see different shapes for different people. They won't move the same way as me.
Right.
But when I see different shapes for their body structure, it's, that's an appeal to me. So that's kind of what I start off with. It's like, I see my body in a certain way with a particular exercise and how your body works in that exercise. And that's kind of what I go for.
That's interesting. I'm very similar in that fashion, but I haven't really heard myself say it that way. It's like the word that comes to my mind is grace, right? If you make it feel like graceful from that. I think the get up's a great exercise to do that, because there's so many different movements, and it's kind of like if it feels better and it looks better, then it probably is better. So it's kind of that same modality there. But strength of being graceful, the get up was one of the first things that I saw, from there that seemed like it related to that, because it's kind of, you're tapping into that creative side of it. It's not just the brute strength, the physical side of it. It's kind of that other energy that you can get into at the same time. And it's something that as coaches, it's almost hard to articulate that to clients that we're working with, but it seems like once they get it and they see it and it looks good, then it's like, it kind of just clicks for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like I'll get clients that'll say, hey, you make that look too easy. I'm like, do you want me to make it look like it's really, really difficult and challenging? Like, why would I have you do it then if I'm like struggling all over the place? So I'm just showing you what's possible. You know, some people don't, I mean, I have clients that just don't want much cueing. They don't really want to be told, you know, do this, do that. And so, you know, as long as they're moving safe and well, I don't, you know, put too much into that finesse with them because that's not really their goal. And so sometimes separating your own personal way of how you want to move for your own personal fulfillment versus what you do with your clients, I feel like there is a difference. You know, if I have some clients that are more in tune with themselves and they like to delve deeper. And so therefore I can show them those things. And then there's others that that's not their goal. And so, you know, you go with that.
Yeah, it is. It's a great point. It's like, if you can get into that, great, but you know, listen to the client first of getting it. Yeah. So you said earlier too, like you did RKC and you got into the kettlebell world relatively early, then was kind of broke a little bit, but then wanted to dive deep. And that's when you got into the bodyweight work, the barbell work, and then became elite. What was it about the other modalities of training and going into elite that really intrigued you?
Honestly, I think I was a little deficient in barbell. So I never, kettlebells were kind of my bread and butter. It just felt good on my body. But barbells were, I just wanted to learn a little bit more about it and found out that I'm actually, you know, I'm good at it. And it was kind of one of those maybe weaker areas in my training that you're like, okay, if it's a weaker area, that's what I need to focus on. So I can kind of build up everything. Body weight, I think that's good. I've always been interested in kind of that calisthenics, gymnastic sides of things. So I think being able to master your body is great.
Okay. Yeah.
So I wanted to do that. And then just the aspect of going for elite is more about the programming of training for all those kind of different modalities. Cause you have to test out for elite. You have to test out of strong first, you need this SFG2, body weight and barbell. So kind of structuring your training around all those for a period of months, I think is just a personal challenge that's fulfilling. How can I, you know, do this, juggle this with my life and my work and what I do and feel like I'm coming out stronger and be able to balance all that. So that was kind of the appeal there too.
Well, it's an interesting, I'm on that journey personally myself right now. So I've got SFL. I've got SFL going on in the end of April, going back to the Dome, which I did my level 2 at like a million years ago. And I'm testing out for elite again. And it's like, how many different modalities can you keep dialed in at one time from there? Like, it's a different type of journey. Yeah.
And it's awesome though, because I felt stronger than ever. And they all work together. But it's a little, you know, puzzle piece you have to put together. And there's something intriguing about that.
It is. No, it's very fun. So now with Indian clubs and stick mobility, how would you get involved in Indian clubs?
So that was through, you probably know Kelly Manzone. Do you know Kelly?
I know the name, I think.
Okay. So she's a good friend of John Parker, me, and kind of we fell into the same circle. So me and about 9 other trainers got connected almost 4 years ago. And through that and through Kelly, I became acquainted with Indian clubs because she does a lot with that. She does a lot of Mace Gata. And her mentor, I got acquainted with her mentor, who's Paul Wolkowinski in Australia. And he's been to India. That's his thing of Indian clubs. So you should check him out. He's amazing. So it started through her and Paul, and he's been my mentor. Honestly, I had a little one-on-one instruction in person. Most of it has been virtual and me just watching his videos or, you know, I'll send him a Marco and he'll, you know, provide critique back. So it was kind of the old school of learning by mentorship versus I'm taking a course or certification through that. And with that, I really wanted to dive into the history and kind of the historical aspects. So I've been online and there's a bunch of old manuals I've read, but setting the analytical side apart, when I had the clubs in my hand and it was a little frustrating at first because you're like, okay, my right hand's supposed to do this and my left hand does this. And I never thought of myself particularly coordinated. Like I was coordinated, but I didn't think like, oh, I'm especially really, really great at it. But lo and behold, once I started doing it and it clicked, I pulled a lot from how I learned things with my singing and my music background, and found that, wow, this really works for me. And it just felt like I was singing, but in a different way. So I was still using the same processes with clubs, and it just, I went down the rabbit hole with it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What is I mean, there's a deep history behind them, right? I mean, it's thousands and thousands of years.
Yes. And, the interesting thing is this. So I've been really kind of thinking about this a lot. And you hit it on when you said something to me earlier about that when in your practice, it helped your elbow. There's a lot of experiential, anecdotal evidence of how clubs have kind of restored the body with certain aches and pains and stuff. Of course, it's the tools in themselves were used not necessarily for purposes that we use now. They were military or wrestling or fighting or those kinds of tools. But they still have a purpose for what we do today. There's actually no scientific research to like say, hey, here's a study, here's a meta study or whatever, that this does X, Y, and Z. And I was talking to some friends about this because we're kind of in that age where you'll say, well, this does this, but they're like, well, the research has to prove it.
Right.
And so there's none.
Really?
And we thought of it because it was in the golden era of fitness. It was actually an Olympic sport, but it soon died out after that. And I think because of that, there hasn't been attention to it. No one's done anything. But I've talked to several people, and we all think like, it'd be great to look at your brain while swinging Indian clubs. What is it doing to your brain?
Right.
We can feel benefits. Everyone is expressing something. So I just find that fascinating because there's definitely, I hear stories all the time of people like, oh, my shoulders are feeling so much better since I've done this, So we have all this rich anecdotal experiential type of information, but there's actually no scientific research.
That's fucking crazy. That is insane to me. Like there's not, well, I mean, because there's got to be research about what the brain does, like dancing and like getting it to work like that.
Or music.
Yeah.
There's similar things where you could say, okay, this is a similar concept. So therefore we can conclude that potentially these benefits are going to be mirrored, but yeah.
That's really interesting. Antonio, if you're listening to this, get on this, because Antonio Squillante is one of my favorite researchers I've talked to before. We need to get some sort of research out there on this. That's incredible. And you said in a day and age right now where there's research on everything that you can see, if there's nothing scientifically on it, then probably a lot of people might just shy away from it and think of it as, not something to That's right. Well, because we're such a performance-based world, right? It's like we're always looking for bigger, faster, stronger type stuff, where something like Indian clubs, which is, I mean, it's a preventative type work, but as I expressed to you before we, hit on here, the one experience I had with it was getting a lot of elbow pain a few years back, probably doing pull-ups too much, doing some heavy pull-ups. And I worked with Brett Jones, my coach, and he got me into some Indian clubs work, from the FMS based world, which is, light. I have 2-pound clubs that I work with, and incredibly slow, kind of deliberate base moves from there. And then sure enough, it's an anecdotal thing. It's just a personal story, but my elbow after a while felt better. And as I joked with you, it felt so good, I just stopped doing it. Right. But the work I've seen you do is, I've seen the ones with like the 1 pound, the 2 pound, or the 5 pound, but then there's like the bigger ones. There's ones that almost like they get like they get broader in their cylinder as you go up. And so there's a lot of different ones that you use. Like how, is there one that you started with and then these are just kind of advanced ones or just different ones or?
So like anything, my heaviest clubs are actually about 5.5 pounds. I don't get into meals. Those are like the bigger ones you'll see. You're going to do more closed chain type movement with those. And I personally, just for my personality and stuff, have stuck with more of the kind of the British influenced light club swinging. So that's where you get a lot of the creative flowy patterns, but you can go up to, if you build your exposure to it, you can go up and do those patterns up to like, depending on your strength level, 10 to 11 pounds. So anything starting at like 15 or above, though, you're probably not going to be doing the open chain movements. That's just, unless you're a super big dude or something can handle that. For most people, light club swinging, as we call it, which is primarily my focus, would be between 1 pound to 5.5 pounds. But most people stay in that like 1 to 2 pound range, because really there's so much you can do at that and still get, good benefits. So,
okay. Is there like, because I've seen the work that you've done and I've seen other, Indian club practitioners do. I mean, there's a million different flows that you can do from there, which have you had people come up and think that are they like intimidated by a practice like this?
They're curious. So definitely like at my gyms that I work at, other trainers be like, what's that? And they just, like, that's Monica. She's always coming in with weird objects. I get questions and people asking, but honestly, not too many people are like, hey, teach me. I just became acquainted with a girl the other day through, I teach a stick mobility class at one of these gyms, and the social media girl there who takes pictures, she's also a trainer, but she does steel mace and she does steel clubs. But I was showing her my Indian clubs. And so it was cool because same thing with her. It's like, no one else is really doing it. But I think part of it is I'm in Texas and then especially in the area I'm at. So I have a kind of a theory that obviously a long time ago, if you look at historical pictures and stuff, kids in school were doing this. This is common part of their PE. And there's a lot of historical PE information where you can see, calisthenics and all that. Their kind of training was part of that physical culture, So I feel there's this saying that perception is reality. And so people that are doing Indian clubs are primarily people that are just concerned about their overall well-being and health, or maybe they had an injury and they're looking for something to just help alleviate that. We have a lot of, Orange Theory Fitness. We have, CrossFits and kind of those niche hit focused, facilities where that's where most people are going because they want to look maybe like an Instagram influencer with, the great figure and the six pack and stuff. And so my theory is if you took one of those Instagram influencers that had the six pack and wears Gymshark or whatever, and they're swinging clubs, how many people would start, like, hey, I want to buy a pair, right? So I feel like part of it is just a perception thing, that if a bodybuilder looking person or someone with that physique that everyone wants, they're using that tool, then people are going to say, hey, that's something I need to do, But right now it's more of people that are interested in movement. They're interested in exploring what else is out there, more of a overall approach to their health. And obviously that's great because those people are looking at things for long term, sustainability. And but I think, more people are definitely interested because I get messages, I get people hitting my website and people buying my online course. So the need is out there and the interest, but I will say most of the time too, I think there's a difference between the sexes. I find more men are interested in that than females. So yeah.
Okay.
At least in my circles, some of my friend Kelly, she's had women too, but she's up in the Northeast. And so I think there's a little different kind of, demographic and appeal up there. Things get to Texas a little bit slower.
Okay. All right. So when you got into, as I said, like, I think a lot of people view it as maybe a movement practice or like a warm up, kind of almost like a Feldenkrais type thing, or it's like a preventative type care, but there's a big strength benefit and coordination benefit to it as well. When you got into this practice, did you see a change at all in the strength work that you were doing as well?
I would say so. I've been thinking about this recently since I just got my 5.5 pair of clubs. And I remember the first time I went from 1 pound to 2 pound, like the 2 pound felt pretty heavy. I had a really hard time doing the wrist circles. And so I had to just build up to that. And then I went from 2 pounds to 5.5 pounds.
Okay.
And when I got my 5.5 pounds, boom, could do everything. Totally fine. Now, I've also been working on a lot of strength with barbell and kettlebell. So there's a direct, that's been helping too. I would say unless you're doing like super, super heavy clubs, the strength component with the light club swinging is a little different. It's not brute strength. It's not, I have 30 pounds, I'm doing, it is it's through different leverages. So if I'm swinging my club out this way, the weight is actually increasing as I'm swinging my club. So a 5.5 pound club you could think of the circle there, its weight is increasing. So it's not 5.5 pounds. It's going to be a lot heavier. So I am having to control my wrist because a lot of people that I work with, they can't control their wrist. They'll break or, something will happen. So if you think about it, I'm having to maintain control through a longer lever. Now this part's going to be easier, right? But the weight is going to be pulling on there. So I have to maintain my structure. So it's the smaller muscles. It's the, joints. Can I maintain their, the range of motion for that particular exercise through that, so strengthen those ways instead of just brute muscle.
Yeah. That was something that I saw is when I was dealing with my elbow issue, I kept breaking my wrists and not even knowing it from the side. And as soon as you just lock that wrist together and kind of get that pointer finger in the right position, all of a sudden you felt that jolt of energy come up through your arm. And then it's just practice, just getting into that motion over and over again. So I think going back even to when we talked about the figure skating days, there's that skill-based work that comes into it, which just hits that one side of the brain a little bit different of getting in. So I could definitely see if somebody's interested and they go deep down into that, it's because there's a skill development that comes into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you were saying, it kind of just brings awareness. So that's what I loved about kettlebells. It brings awareness to how your body moves. Same thing with clubs. It's like, okay, I might be a little lacking in coordination, or I'm not good at doing two things at once, or I'm just not very graceful, So not that those are, you need that for your health, but we're talking about kind of like above and beyond that, kind of just digging deeper into a practice. I mean, that's what art is about a little bit, I think. And these are, I think, kind of artistic practices, just in my mind. Where was I going with this? But you were saying, the elbow joint. So if part of it's efficiency too. So I was coaching someone the other day, and again, if you're like breaking the wrist, you're just making it harder for yourself. Start losing that energy that you mentioned in the circle, because swinging's based off of the gravitational pull, inertia. And eventually when you get into that rhythm of it, wow, it just feels really, really good instead of kind of fighting your body or muscling it, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. So when you start with somebody on this, is there particular movements that you start with? Is it is it slow first and then just speed up as the person's kind of, as they're just naturally like feeling more comfortable with it? Or you just stay with a very slow particular movement to begin with?
So I do, I always start with just one club. Although I find sometimes people actually do better with two clubs. It's almost like when you're trying to do a one arm strict press and people actually press better doing both.
Yeah.
Is same concept. So, but I usually start with one club. I do pendulums. So that's usually kind of my starting point. So a pendulum is I'm starting up here and then I just let my arm fall and it comes across. So I start getting them into the rhythm of club swinging so that it's not effortful. It's an energy thing. So getting into the timing, we work on the grip and just a good standard posture. And then eventually, like if I'm teaching them a heart swing, we do break it down. So I teach them the pattern. It's kind of like a get up, get up is made of different components. Well, the heart swing has a lot of different components. So we break it down. And then I really try to focus on swinging is circular training. So the joint, especially your shoulder joint, can move in a circular fashion. Same with your wrist. You can get that more in your reels when you do reels and stuff. And the elbow, of course, can't move 360,
right,
but it has a bit of, rotational in there. So focusing on, let's just explore what your joint fully can do, and that's kind of how I teach things. So we start off slow. I don't go incredibly slow. But once they've gotten that concept, then I just want them to get into almost kind of like that heartbeat pulse. That's about as fast as we'll go.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Because eventually, once you go too fast, you start losing again that feeling of gravity pulling you down and it just becomes whippy.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. I was the one that one club just didn't feel right. It felt like I was rotating too much. Like I wasn't getting, all of a sudden you throw that second one in there and the slow grace, just kind of movement just felt like it just popped in just a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then with that, is there a correlation with Indian clubs and stick mobility, or are they like two very different practices?
I would say they're different practices because club swinging is based off of circular patterns.
Right.
It's swinging, it has motion to it. With stick mobility, it's taking, again, you can kind of use it for whatever you want. At least that's how I do it. So it can use isometric training principles. So if you want to train isometrics, which can be really, really great for clients or people maybe that are not mobilized, maybe they're in a wheelchair or they just came out of a surgery and they're very limited to what they can do. But isometric training is really great. You can do a lot with that and get people to feel their body again and how to create tension. So I've used the isometric principles to help prime my heavier lifts. So if I feel like I'm not generating enough tension before I lift, I'll take my stick and I'll do a movement with it. And then I'll go right into my lift. And most of the time I have a successful lift or I achieved what I set out to do.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's one component. You can use it as a flexibility tool. So you can use it as a passive flexibility, like there's a straddle stretch. So you're kind of in the straddle position, the stick's behind you, and then you rotate. And so you can work on just breathing and passive stretching. So you can do that, or you can use it as just a strict mobility joint function tool. So, if I just want to do shoulder dislocates, there's plenty of things, or you can kind of combine all of them, because if you want to do a little bit of the strength and the isometric principle along with a stretch, we do a lot of like pushing and pulling apart of the stick, which I find, so any way that I can train a client to feel their body and feel like what they should be using for the particular move, I'd rather do a nonverbal cue. And because if you can feel something, you're going to remember it versus like me trying to articulate it.
Right.
So if you're doing a push pull, a lot of times they're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I feel my lats, or okay, so now I got it. And then they can incorporate that into the lift that we're trying to do.
Right. It's interesting. I talked with Denzel Allen a short while ago. We were talking about that, of his one main question he talks about when getting new clients in is, how do you learn? Like, what's your learning style? where it's like, do you learn by, by audio, visual, by feeling and stuff? And it's interesting because I'm the same way. Like if you show me and I can feel it from there, then I usually can stay with it. And like, okay, this practice feels good to get me to feel tension for my lift. But audio cues are much different from there. And I think that's an important, especially for coaches, like of how you cue the proper way from there. I think that's it's just a huge point that we should always be remembering. Absolutely. And that's why it goes back to, they don't teach you that stuff really in your education, growing up. And so you can go in and start teaching and coaching people thinking, why aren't they getting this? This is what I learned and blah, blah, blah. And I do the same thing. I had one client, I said, I was teaching him clubs and I said, what do you feel is the best way that you learn, visual, kinesthetic, all that kind of stuff. And he's like, I don't really know. Yeah. Like he didn't really have any of that. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay, I have to think. I think the best thing for him was just looking in the mirror. He couldn't feel anything different. Yeah. The words really didn't help. So that was an interesting one. But I think that's so important because you're going to take the process of that client much longer if you're trying to ram down a certain style. Yeah. That's not them. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. It's an interesting question, right? Because it'd be so beautiful if everybody just gives you that answer right away. But that's what I thought too. I was like, what if you don't actually know? Because a lot of times that might never have been a question you've been answered before. It was a little while back I talked with Nick Winkleman, who has his book on cueing for coaching, which is just fascinating. And he did this example with us of like an audio cue, then a visual. And then he had another one. We were talking about squatting. And he said, imagine that there's a snake right behind you. And it's going to bite you in the butt, and said, beat the bite. And he said, of all three of those, like what resonates with you so much? And in my head, I was like, beat the bite. And the next time I went down to I was doing some strength aerobics work. And every time I went down to a squat, that's just popped into my head. But I never thought of it that way before, of like what resonates with you so much. Yeah, it's so true. I think that is so important because I have a lot of that from, again, goes back to my music background. We use a lot of imagery to help. I'm a classical singer. So particularly you're always thinking about, okay, what kind of sound and emotion. And so a lot of imagery can help with that. I'm also highly analytical too. So kind of finding that balance. But with most people, again, the older I've gotten and the more years I've accumulated, I think most people respond to nonverbal cues. It's that external stuff. Hey, I want you to grip the floor and pull it apart, or here's a stick and I want you to do this, some kind of task or whatever. Very few grasp. Like I was thinking the other day, the cue that's common, pack the shoulders, and then you think about it, you're like, okay, so when you do Jefferson curls, your shoulders aren't packed. Mm-hmm. They're actually out here, you know, and you're strong in that position. Okay. And so why do we pack the shoulders? Like, well, on a swing, you really don't want that. It's not purposeful for that movement, so that's why we say pack the shoulders. Mm-hmm. But when people pack the shoulders, typically what I see is they pull their shoulders back, they retract their rhomboids, and then it gets all funky and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which is tighten the lats. Yeah. Really, ultimately. Mm-hmm. And so I was coming up with different cues. I'm like, I think this is a better way to go about it. Because honestly, even though I'll do kind of like a physical cue or a drill with them to help with pack the shoulders, they just don't get it. Yeah. We do, possibly because we've been in the profession for a long time and we understand intrinsically what they're trying to get across. Right. For population, they need something simple. They need something accessible. Well, it is. It is funny. Like when you say to just the average person, right? Like stand up with your shoulders back. Naturally, we just like go way back and like we retract through our rhomboids. It's like, no, just kind of natural from. And I think the word you said, before, Monica, is awareness, right? Is if we want to have awareness of our body. So I'm like going back to Indian clubs. I can think almost, is it easier sometimes for somebody like to not overcomplicate it? Like you say, like just practice this movement. It doesn't matter if it's like perfect, just kind of the practice of it kind of finds that flow of what naturally works best with their architecture? Absolutely. I think so.
Granted, in my younger years, for sure, I think we've all been there. We're like, it's got to be like this and look like this. And then that's not the way it happens. And so for most people, I've been very grateful to not have any injuries. So for my movement patterns are pretty fluid. I don't have, anything like that. So, but most of my clients have some sort of, something.
So maybe there's something to this mobility stuff you're talking about.
Yeah. So when they come in, you have to get away from judging how their movement looks and realize, is it actually doing the exercise? What they're doing, is it actually doing what it's supposed to do for their body? So if this is their range of motion and they're getting that circular fashion and they're working that joint that particular way for them, then it's doing its intended purpose. It doesn't have to look like me or anybody else. So yes, I think even when I started, I go back and I look, I'm like, man, I've developed a lot along the way, just because once you start doing something, the body starts wanting to figure out, how can I do this better or more efficiently? Like that's my mind when I'm running. I'm like, how can I make this less hard?
Right. Exactly. Well, and then you see the people who are big into running and they've made it into an art form and it looks so graceful. It looks good, where it's like, you can say like, I don't look like I don't run like that. Like, I know I don't look like that, but they've made it into that grace. That's the creative side of getting into mastery, right? It's like, you put your reps in first, but then find what works best for you in your own body and your own mindset to kind of put into that pattern.
I agree. And I think that's a good point with the runners, because they're going to be, even though it can be effortful, it's still efficient. So it's not just like I'm out there running and I'm making it harder for myself than it actually has to be. So when I look at grace and movement, it's making things more efficient. So, and in turn, I become stronger and things become a little bit easier, so I could make it harder,
Right.
But it's just the efficiency of it, I think. And maybe that's just our human nature. We want to make things easier and find shortcuts, in a way to take away the torture on our bodies.
Yeah. But then on the flip side of that too, we think that everything that builds strength has to be suffering. Like you have to put in like your max effort and make it look challenging, when it's like, no, maybe you have to sacrifice and like put some time, but it doesn't have to suffer. You don't have to, if every time you like stepped up to do a kettlebell swing, you had to do smelling salts and look like you're going for like a 1 rep max, I don't think we'd have a successful program anymore. No. So yeah,
I agree with that. I think, a lot of things that we learn, like the power of breathing and stuff. I mean, unless I'm doing, I want to do like max swings or something, I'll do that. But most of the time I approach my breath a lot like how I run. So even if I'm swinging the beast for 40 reps, I still got great power. I still got what I want. And I'm not doing a power breath. I'm just breathing naturally.
Yeah.
How I want to. If I'm going to test out on it, I'll breathe the way they want me to.
Oh, right.
But I can do both, I can do both and I can be efficient, whatever. So I'm flexible that way, because I think it's just, again, I'm thinking more efficiency. So, I think, it's good to kind of say, hey, I can do this, but I can also do this, and know what the purposes are for.
So how do you use these modalities in your daily training with Indian clubs and sticks? Is this something you're doing every day? Is this like more of a warm-up practice that you do now for your strength, or how do you incorporate this in your training?
Two of the primary ways that I use clubs, or mace too, but clubs particularly, I'll use it as, so if I'm focusing on my deadlift and maybe my squats and I'm doing some heavy lifting, I'll superset basic club work with my heavier clubs in between. So I'll just do, 10 heart shapes. I'll do, 10 outward heart shapes, 10 inward heart shapes. I might do 2 sets of that, set the clubs down, and then I go back and do my lift. So that gives me some time, to recharge again, to put into my, effort, for the lift. But it also, for me, when I'm coming up to do the lift and I'm, creating all that tension, it just allows me to relax again. So I'm getting out of that tension state, and then I'll go back, and I kind of just go back and forth again. So I'm not always like, okay, now everything's really tense. So that's primarily, I'll use it that way. And then other times it's just, I want to stimulate the creative side of my brain. And so I'll take my lighter clubs and I'm just going to explore. So I want to try this, and I do a lot of free flows, or I will create a sequence, and then I'll want to, practice on my memory and remember that, so those are the two primary ways that I incorporate.
On your play day, like that kind of one day when you're exploring, is that something you set up in your schedule, or is it just more if that day feels like it's a day to explore, you just go into it?
Both.
Okay.
So I do like to work off of kind of a schedule. I have training schedule for myself, but I came up with a word called structural adaptability because that just fits me, meaning I have structure.
I love that.
You like it?
I do. Yes.
Well, it's fitting because I like structure, but I've seen so many people just fall off the bandwagon because they couldn't be adaptable. So they have a structure, they have a program, and then, something came up in my life and I couldn't train this day, and then boom, everything's over. And I don't see it that way. I see it as we're just adaptable, and maybe there's something else you can do, and then you get right back into your program. So you never really deviate. You just take a tiny little detour. So I have days that are my mace swinging days, Indian club days, kind of recovery days. But sometimes, I'll just say, hey, I feel like swinging clubs today and I want to do something creative. So that's kind of my approach.
I think that's so important for people to do, is that play day. And it's interesting because all of last year I did an intuitive based training program, like with biofeedback work and stuff, and working with Brett and a lot of iron cardio and strength aerobics, which was kind of every day you didn't know what you were doing. It's like, I feel good today. So you go into that, and there's such benefits from that. But the structured adaptability, I think, talking as coaches, it seems that people if you've got your reps in and you're like a coach, or all this, then you can go explore. It's like, no, I think anybody should go in and have that day where you just explore and just kind of enjoy movement for the sake of movement. It's not I feel like we sometimes put these prerequisites as coaches on clients and people that we're working with of no, you have to do this first. But it's no, go out and just explore and because that's when you find new things that feel good for you and tap into that creative side of the brain. And it's not something we talk about a lot in the fitness industry, of the creative side of it. It's so much like structure and 3 days a week or 5 days a week and do this. It's no, go out and play, grab that bell that just feels like you can play with it all day and just go have fun.
You bring up a good point. A thought came to me earlier, how when we step inside the gym, it's almost like we become a different person. Now we have to do things a certain way. And then if we're outside, lifting stones or playing or just doing lifts, we're way more free. We're picking up things kind of sometimes with a rounded back, or, it's just, we're doing what the human body was designed to do. And then it's like, okay, gotta go to the gym. And now I'm a different person.
Yeah.
And I've struggled that with clients because a lot of times they might see you 3 times a week or 2 times a week. You can, you have a limited amount of time that you can work with them. And so you're always constantly thinking, what is their most pressing need?
Right.
So it's challenging. And, but the closest thing inside the gym that I can do to kind of get that exploration aspect a little bit is and I learned this from Denis with stick mobility, and it was great, and it stuck with me, is have them do a task. So if you find they're a little hesitant maybe to do a squat or put something overhead for whatever kind of fear they have them do a task that requires that, but it's outside of, we're training right now.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're doing it just fine. So it's all that psychological aspect that's really playing into a lot of things. But, I think it's kind of like the play and the creative side is so important, but also I feel like people are so bogged down with just even basics and so much information that getting to the play is hard. So I don't know, chicken or the egg? should play first and then the other. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's because I think there's a point too, and we don't talk about this a lot because we're in fitness, but like you do work with music, like I do a lot of work with writing. It's like sometimes getting into that creative side, maybe outside of fitness, but talking to clients about that stuff as well. Like, get your structure type work for a bit. But if there is some sort of creative aspect that you have outside of that, then if you bring that into a fitness program, they have a reference point of what that feels like outside of it as well. Because so many people, we don't do much. Like people go to work, they go this and everything's structured, it's, out. And then it's like, what are we doing for fun? What's tapping that creative energy? And I've just found when you get into that energy as well, and if you can incorporate it into your training, then you're becoming part of the process. It's not just somebody telling you something to do, or you just blindly following a 6-week program, to follow with, because anybody can do that. Right. But there's no attachment to it. It's like you're fitting your life around a program, not having a program and your health fit around you.
Right. Right. And you're bringing up it when you have like just a program too, it's kind of like, okay, I started here and I end here. Now what next? But if you're incorporating play and creativity, it's just that constant ebb and flow where I think it would help people approach fitness as a lifestyle instead of, okay, I've got to do a 6-week program to lose this amount of weight or do this. Like I love structure. Like for 6 months, this is my goal. I've got to train like this and do this. Like it's awesome. Absolutely love it. And then for several months after, I'm still kind of in that phase. I'm gradually ramping up into back a strict like structure, but I just wanted to do what my body was telling me to do. Or what did I feel like today? I want to go out inside and I want to go trail run, or I've been starting up sprint intervals again, like with running. I'm like, wow, I forgot how good this feels, So I'm kind of just exploring different things and not worrying about so much. I've got to hit this goal, or, going outside and, I was lifting stones the other day and playing around with that.
Yeah.
Stones, and it's fun.
It is. It's so fun it's hard when you're such a structured person. I think a lot of us are that way. But once you do kind of get out of that little bit of an uncomfortable position of like almost not having a program or not having a specific goal and actually enjoying the training of it, it's almost like you feel like you never want to go back. Like you can go back and forth between the structure, but it's always just, you understand what it feels like to play now. And if you have that, I think it's just, who doesn't want to play? Because play is fun.
Right. It's a stress reliever. It makes you feel good. It's just an outlet. Like, playgrounds, playgrounds are for kids. Well, hey, I'm still a kid, I'll see a playground. I'm like, oh, I want to try this, or let's see what I can do with this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Go climb that swing set. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Monica, it's been a blast talking with you. Like I said, I love the work that you do. I love everything that you're putting out. So I appreciate you taking the time today and jumping on.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed it as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to know more about your work, I know you have courses out there as well. What's the best place that we can direct them?
Probably my Instagram, because that's where everything's linked. So it's BoldFitTechnique on Instagram. And then I have a link underneath it. So I have a foundational course for Indian clubs right now. So it's progressive. It's in modules, so it's easy to follow, and that will get you started on the basics. That's on Ensemble website. I also have my personal website that has kettlebell programs. It has some stick mobility on there as well. So if you want to hit me up on any of those, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Monica, you're awesome. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Listeners, thank you so much. If you want to check out Monica's stuff, you know where to do so. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like the show, please give it a 5-star review, give it a thumbs up, all that good stuff. And if you want to get the inside scoop on all new episodes coming up, behind the scenes insights, and free training resources, then you can join the Strength Connection private Facebook group now. Just go to Facebook groups, type in the Strength Connection, and join in. Also, don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.